Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, May 16, 2024. House Judiciary Committee votes to recommend Attorney General Merrick Garland be held in contempt of Congress for not turning over an audio recording of President Joe Biden's interview with the special counsel who investigated his handling of classified documents. The vote comes after the White House said the recording is covered by executive privilege and not available to Congress. A group of House Republicans in the Freedom Caucus traveled to New York City for the Donald Trump hush money trial. Matt Gaetz of Florida saying the former president was on trial for a made-up crime, and he called it the Mr. Potato Head of crimes, unrelated elements awkwardly stuck together. President Joe Biden announces what he calls a major step in reclassifying marijuana as a lower-risk substance, officially publishing the proposed change and opening it to public comment. U.S. House passes a bill to require the president deliver previously approved weapons to Israel, and the bill withholds money from the Secretaries of Defense and State until shipments now on pause are sent. FDIC Chair Martin Gruenberg spends a second day before Congress, questioned by a Senate committee about a report that found a toxic work environment at his agency. The future of a federal broadband service subsidy program for low-income households was discussed at a House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing with FCC commissioners, and a statue of the late Reverend Billy Graham, known as America's Pastor, is unveiled in the U.S. Capitol. This from Roll Call: a White House move to withhold audio recordings Thursday did not derail a push from House Republicans to recommend holding Attorney General Merrick B. Garland in contempt of Congress. President Joe Biden invoked executive privilege over audio recordings of former special counsel Robert K. Hur's interviews with the president and a ghostwriter who worked with Biden. The privilege generally has given a president the authority to withhold information to protect the executive branch's ability to confer and make decisions outside of public view. Hur's report included a discussion of how the president's memory was significantly limited during the interview. Republicans have used Hur's conclusions about Biden's mental acuity to criticize the president. That was some reporting from Roll Call. Before today's markup of the contempt resolution in the Judiciary Committee, the Attorney General Merrick Garland spoke to reporters at the Justice Department.
In your professional capacity, you suggested to the president to invoke executive privilege. He invoked executive privilege. It protects you both personally. Is that a conflict of interest?
Look, the Justice Department is a fundamental institution of our democracy. People depend on us to ensure that our investigations and our prosecutions are conducted according to the facts and the law and without political influence. We have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that the committees get responses to their legitimate requests. But this is not one. To the contrary, this is one that would harm our ability in the future to successfully pursue sensitive investigations. Now, there have been a series of unprecedented and frankly unfounded attacks on the Justice Department. This request, this effort to use contempt as a method of obtaining our sensitive law enforcement files is just the most recent. The effort to threaten to defund our investigations and the way in which there are contributions to an atmosphere that puts our agents and our prosecutors at risk, these are wrong. Look, the only thing I can do is continue to do the right thing. I will protect this building and its people.
Attorney General Merrick Garland meeting with reporters at the Justice Department. The White House counsel Ed Siskel writing a letter to the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees about invoking executive privilege related to the audio recording of the special counsel's interview with the president and the ghostwriter in the classified documents investigation. That letter reads in part, demanding such sensitive and constitutionally protected law enforcement materials from the executive branch because you want to manipulate them for potential political gain is inappropriate. The absence of a legitimate need for the audio recordings lays bare your likely goal, to chop them up, distort them, and use them for partisan political purposes. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, addressed this issue this morning.
About an hour ago, we learned that President Biden has invoked executive privilege to prevent the American people from hearing the audio recordings of his testimony with Special Counsel Robert Hur. The American people will not be able to hear why prosecutors felt the President of the United States was, in Special Counsel Robert Hur's words, a, quote, elderly man with a poor memory, and thus shouldn't be charged. Just think about that for a moment. President Biden is apparently afraid for the citizens of this country and everyone to hear those tapes. They obviously confirm what the special counsel has found and would likely cause, I suppose, in his estimation, such alarm with the American people that the president is using all of his power to suppress their release.
House Speaker Mike Johnson on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building at the start of a news conference that was called on a different subject. Later in the day, the House Judiciary Committee met, debated, and passed the contempt resolution. 18-15 was the vote. An article in The Hill noting that the Judiciary Committee and the Oversight Committee, which will be marking up a resolution tonight, each will review resolutions accusing Attorney General Merrick Garland both of having hindered their oversight of Special Counsel Hur, as well as having impeded the committee's impeachment inquiry. The article in The Hill continues, in doing so, Republicans are pushing forward a new claim for their Biden impeachment investigation, that the president intentionally kept classified documents to aid in the writing of his memoir, possibly concealing other evidence of aid to his family's business ventures in the process. Again, that was from The Hill. Here's part of the Judiciary Committee meeting. The chair is Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio.
Special Counsel Robert Hur stated on page 1 of his report, quote, "Our investigation uncovered evidence that President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. Joe Biden not only kept information he wasn't allowed to keep, he shared it with people who weren't allowed to see it. He shared that information with his ghostwriter. Special Counsel Hur said that President Biden had strong motivations to do so and to ignore the rules of properly handling the classified information in his notebooks. In fact, he had 8 million reasons to ignore the rules. Joe Biden shared some of the classified materials he kept with his ghostwriter, who was writing a book for which Joe Biden received an $8 million advance. So we have motive, $8 million motive, and we have the elements of the crime, knowingly keeping, knowingly disclosing classified information. But all this, and Special Counsel Hur declines to prosecute Joe Biden because he is, quote, a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. And that brings us to today. Following the release of Special Counsel Hur's report, we subpoenaed the transcript and audio recordings of Special Counsel Hur's interviews with President Biden and his ghostwriter, Mark Zwanitzer. To date, Attorney General Garland has failed to produce the audio tapes. To determine whether Special Counsel Hur appropriately carried out justice by not prosecuting, not recommending for prosecution the president, the recordings are necessary. The transcripts alone are not sufficient evidence of the state of the president's memory, frankly, because the White House has a track record of altering the transcripts. Just weeks ago, during a public speech, President Biden read a teleprompter instruction to pause. He stated, "Imagine what we could do next, 4 more years, pause." But when the White House put out the transcript, it didn't include the word pause. In that case, and in this case as well, the video and the audio recording is the best evidence of the words that President Biden actually spoke.
Congressman Jim Jordan, chair of the Judiciary Committee at today's meeting. The ranking Democrat on the committee is Gerald Nadler from New York.
They accuse the Attorney General of withholding key evidence, but the Attorney General has substantially complied with their every request. DOJ has produced 92,000 pages of documents this Congress alone and made dozens of witnesses available for interviews, hearings, and briefings before the committee. That's more pages of documents and more witnesses than the Trump Justice Department produced to this committee in 4 years. With respect to the February 27th, 2024 subpoena, the department turned over all the information Republicans asked for. There's been no obstruction, only cooperation. This morning, the president exerted executive privilege over the audio files at issue. In the letter informing the committee of this assertion, the Department of Justice noted that producing the audio recordings would, quote, raise an unacceptable risk of undermining the department's ability to conduct high-profile criminal investigations. In particular, investigations with the voluntary cooperation of the White House officials is exceedingly important, close quote. Chairman Jordan claims that he needs this record to understand the pauses, pace, and tone of the conversation. This is absurd and clearly pretextual, and in any event does not outweigh the substantial concerns expressed by the President and the Department. Moreover, with respect to the recording at issue in this report, a complete transcript has already been provided to the committee. The only thing that has not been produced is the recording itself, which can be easily manipulated. This is not an idle concern. Last year, a witness testifying in a closed-door deposition told us that she was the victim of a manipulated video amplified by Republicans on this committee and that it contributed to a flood of death threats against her. This isn't really about a policy disagreement with the DOJ. This is about feeding the MAGA base and getting Donald Trump reelected.
Congressman Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York, ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, at today's markup of the Contempt of Congress recommendation against the Attorney General Merrick Garland. After 4 hours of debate, it passed 18-15, sending it to the full House. If it passes the House and he's held in contempt, he'll be the third Attorney General in history to have that happen to him. The others are Eric Holder in 2012 and Bill Barr in 2019. Neither of those people, though, faced criminal charges from the Justice Department. Story from Fox News. The House Committee on Oversight Chair James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, announced a new legislative motion that aims to unveil financial information related to the Biden family. He said on Mornings with Maria Thursday, "This morning I issued a subpoena for targeted financial information from a certain financial institution related to Jim Biden, Sarah Biden, and Hunter Biden. This is a result of many of the documents that Devin Archer turned over." From the New York Daily News, a large group of Republican members of Congress showed up Thursday in a lower Manhattan court to show support for former President Donald Trump in his criminal trial for covering up hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels. Led by Trump loyalist Matt Gaetz of Florida and Lauren Boebert of Colorado, 9 GOP lawmakers trooped into the courtroom to back the party's presumptive presidential nominee. That was from the Daily News. During a break in the testimony, they went down from the courtroom to the street level, where a microphone was set up in a nearby park to speak to the media. Congressman Gaetz led off.
Well, I'm honored to be here with my colleagues from the House Freedom Caucus, where we watched Michael Cohen get dog-walked through the series of lies he has told. There is literally no branch of government that Michael Cohen has not lied to. He lied to investigators. He lied to the judge who sentenced him. He lied to the United States Congress, and he committed these lies for his own benefit. And while we're talking about what we saw in that courtroom going on for people's own benefit, we would be remiss if we did not mention this corrupt judge, this judge whose own family is making 6 figures off of Democrat politics that continues to gaslight the country that there's some sort of crime committed by President Trump. This is a made-up crime. No other American in the country would be charged with this type of crime. It's like the Mr. Potato Head doll of crimes, where they had to stick together a bunch of things that did not belong together. Observing the jury, I could see that there was a great appreciation for the liar that Michael Cohen was, and we are not getting a fair shake in front of this judge. The prosecutors don't even have to state the basis for their objections. He's agreeing with the prosecutors without even hearing argument on these objections, and there should be evidence getting in about the depth and breadth of Michael Cohen's lies that we're not seeing entered into it. And so we're here voluntarily supporting our friend President Trump, the leader of our movement, the leader of our party, and soon again the leader of this great country.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, standing beside a dozen or so House Republicans, many from the conservative Freedom Caucus in New York City, outside the building where the Donald Trump hush money trial is taking place. Story from USA Today. President Joe Biden's reelection campaign Thursday accepted an invitation by CBS News for a vice presidential debate in either July or August between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's vice presidential nominee. Biden campaign said it accepted 2 dates proposed by CBS for the debate, July 23rd or August 13th. The agreement comes one day after The Biden and Trump campaigns agreed to two televised presidential debates, one on June 27th, hosted by CNN, the other September 10th on ABC. Donald Trump, the former president and presumptive Republican nominee, has not named his vice presidential running mate and isn't expected to until closer to the Republican National Convention set for July 15th through the 18th. That from USA Today. In Washington, D.C., the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, held his weekly news conference. He spoke about this being National Police Week, and he urged Speaker Mike Johnson to install a memorial plaque honoring law enforcement officers who died defending the U.S. Capitol during the January 6, 2021 attack in the middle of former President Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 election and stay in power. He said that law authorizing the plaque required it to be installed over a year ago.
It's also our view that we should honor the men and women of law enforcement who on January 6th sacrificed it all, put their lives on the line and at risk in order to defend the Congress, defend the Constitution, and defend the core values in our country, such as the peaceful transfer of power. There is a law on the books that requires the Congress to designate a place of significance in the Capitol to honor the men and women of law enforcement, including the Capitol Police and the Metropolitan Police Department, and many others who responded on that fateful day to put down a violent insurrection. It's time for House Republicans to honor the men and women of law enforcement who saved lives that day, including Democrats and Republicans, our staff members, and most importantly, defended the Constitution.
U.S. House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries at a news conference on Capitol Hill. This is Washington Today. The Justice Department, writes NBC News, took a significant step toward rescheduling marijuana Thursday, formalizing its process to reclassify the drug as lower risk and remove it from a category in which it has been treated as more dangerous than fentanyl and meth. President Biden made the announcement in a video on X.
This is monumental. Today, my administration took a major step to reclassify marijuana from a Schedule I drug to a Schedule III drug. It's an important move toward reversing long-standing inequities. Today's announcement builds on the work we've already done to pardon a record number of federal offenses for simple possession of marijuana. And it adds to the action we've taken to lift barriers to housing, employment, small business loans, and so much more for tens of thousands of Americans. Look, folks, no one should be in jail merely for using or possessing marijuana, period. Far too many lives have been upended because of failed approach to marijuana, and I'm committed to righting those wrongs. You have my word on it.
President Biden posting that video today. More from the NBC News article. After the DEA reviews and considers the public comments, and at the conclusion of any requested hearing, the DEA will issue a final order to reschedule marijuana. And the DEA could decline to reschedule the drug, but that's unlikely given the administration's strong support. The entire process can take anywhere from a few months to up to a year. Once completed, federal scientists will be able to research and study the potential medical benefits of the drug for the first time since the Controlled Substances Act was enacted in 1971. It could also open the door for pharmaceutical companies to get involved with the sale and distribution of medical marijuana in states where it is legal. That reporting from NBC News. Morehouse College President David A. Thomas, this from CNN, said Thursday he would shut down commencement ceremonies on the spot rather than allow police to remove student protesters in zip ties during President Joe Biden's graduation speech. Biden's scheduled commencement speech Sunday at one of the nation's preeminent historically black colleges comes as school officials around the country have called in law enforcement to clear pro-Palestinian encampments and quell demonstrations in recent weeks. From CNN. Stephen Benjamin, director of the White House Office of Public Engagement, who the White House says met with Morehouse College students this week, today took reporters' questions in the White House briefing room.
I do wonder what kind of reception do you, having been there, expect the president to receive at Morehouse? Also, does he plan to have any direct engagement with students or faculty there? A lot of them that I've talked to have said, you know, we don't just want a campaign speech or a speech at us, but we want to be able to talk policy or talk about their issues.
Sure. I'm sure the president will have a chance to engage with faculty, staff, and students while he's there, and I know that he looks forward to it. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, well, the first one, what kind of, having talked to students at Morehouse, what kind of reception do you expect him to receive?
Sure. It's so important to realize that no community is monolithic. Even some of the range of opinions that we received last Friday and that I've heard from speaking with literally dozens and dozens of folk just about this speech over the last several days, people have different thoughts about what they might want to hear. I do know that the president, again, is very focused on centering these young men and what this transition in life means to them. So we listen very closely. We've received those messages and we shared those with the president and his speechwriting team.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy birthday to your daughter.
Thank you.
Does the president share the president of Morehouse College's belief that the graduation ceremony should be halted if there are protests or disruptions?
You know, I'm going to let Morehouse handle Morehouse and let Dr. Thomas, who's been wonderful to work with, as we prepare for the commencement. I'll let him speak for Morehouse College. The president's been very clear. I mean, we live in a amazing country where you have 3 estates of government and you have a 4th estate that personifies the importance of the right to free speech. And you do it well. That right to free speech extends to even those who wish to protest, and he respects that, and he makes it a point to lean in when there are protesters in the very same space. So we'll respect that. I think as long as they're peaceful protests that don't disrupt the amazing moment that is for each of those graduates there today, I think we'll all consider this a success.
Did the White House ever consider canceling the speech once you learned that there likely would be protests?
No, not that I know of, but I'll defer that to someone else. No, ma'am.
Stephen Benjamin, director of the White House Office of Public Engagement, today at the White House News Conference, talking about the commencement address that President Biden's scheduled to give at Morehouse College in Atlanta on Sunday. The U.S. House today passed a bill that requires President Biden to send weapons to Israel, a reaction to the president's recent pause in a shipment of bombs and his warning the U.S. will not supply arms for an invasion of Rafah in southern Gaza, where over 1 million civilians are sheltering from the war between Israel and Hamas. An ABC News article has this: the legislation urges the expeditious delivery of defense articles and services to Israel and reaffirms Israel's right to self-defense. It would withhold funds for certain administration officials, such as Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State, until such defense articles are delivered. On the House floor, Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, Republican from Florida, speaking in favor.
What the administration doesn't understand, Mr. Speaker, is what an effective foreign policy requires. It requires having the ability to distinguish allies from enemies, those fighting for their lives in self-defense versus terrorists seeking to kill, to harm, and to destroy them. Israel must do what is necessary to eradicate that depraved terrorist group, Hamas. Hamas, a proxy of terrorist state Iran, the same Iran which also, for the first time ever, under the weakness of this administration, directly attacked Israel. Israel needs these weapons to eradicate the terrorists who have vowed the destruction of Israel, and Israel needs it to protect itself and its people. Withholding vital resources jeopardizes not only Israel's ability to defend itself, but also our national security by harming and weakening our strongest ally. In the Biden administration's veto threat, Mr. Speaker, it says that the rationale was to prevent unintended consequences, with no other explanation, by the way. What about the likely consequences of failure to fully support Israel now, when they need it? Does the administration doubt that Hamas will seize any opening, any opportunity to further maim and torture and kill? Congress approved the supplemental in a bipartisan way, and we expect the administration to follow the law and to deliver. We cannot stand by while Biden administration tries to force Israel to fight for its very own existence with one hand tied behind its back. I want to thank my colleagues, Chairman Calvert, Chairman Cole, Chairman Joyce, and I want to also thank the Speaker and Leader Scalise for bringing this very important bill to the floor. It is time to tell the administration, keep your word, support Israel, follow the law, send the weapons that you, Mr. President, and Israel has requested. I yield back.
Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, Republican from Florida, on the House floor. Congressman Brad Sherman, Democrat from California, said he'll be voting no.
My pro-Israel efforts began long before my 28 years on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I believe that my pro-Israel record is as long and as strong as any member of this House. I rise to oppose this pseudo-pro-Israel bill. It purports to deal with this issue of 2,000-pound bombs. As the ranking members pointed out, suspensions occurred also under Reagan and Ford. But more significantly, this is just a communicative act. It has no strategic significance. Israel already has such a large stockpile of 2,000 and similar weapons that the administration is going to be providing many thousands of JDAM kits to turn those dumb bombs into smart bombs. The chair is working with several of us on a much better response to this suspension, and I look forward to that working its way through the committee. No one should be tempted to vote for this bill. There'll be a better bill. This bill does nothing to help Israel strategically, but it attacks Israel at its two weakest points. The first is bipartisan support. Israel has one friend in the world. It cannot afford to have only one half of one friend. We saw that bipartisan support when 85% of Democrats and 85% of Republicans voted to provide Israel with $14 billion of extraordinary aid. But this resolution has poison pills, including condemning Biden by name, in a clear effort to get as little Democratic support as possible. Second, this bill attacks Israel's international image. Israel, in fact, meets American international standards for minimizing civilian casualties. But what this bill does is it exempts Israel from the Leahy and similar laws, in effect declaring from this Congress to the world that Israel can't meet the standard. Israel is doing at least as good a job as any military in the history of urban warfare. The report from the Biden administration wasn't as clear as it should be on that, but reached the right conclusion. Congress should not step forward and exempt Israel from a test that Israel clearly meets. That's poison on the international stage.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Congressman Brad Sherman, Democrat from California. The House passed this bill titled the Israel Security Assistance Act by a vote of 224 to 187. It condemns the Biden administration's pause of military weapons to Israel and compels the White House to expeditiously send them by withholding funds for the offices of the Defense Secretary and Secretary of State and National Security Council until they are delivered. 16 Democrats voted yes, 3 Republicans voted no. Bill now heads to the Senate. The White House opposes it. President Biden said he would veto it if it reaches his desk. The Pentagon says a temporary floating pier to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza has been anchored to the beach and ready for operation. It's called JLOTS, for Joint Logistics Over the Shore. The State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel gave more information at the start of his news conference today.
The temporary pier is now in place and affixed, and we expect assistance to flow through this route in the coming days. The temporary pier, part of the humanitarian maritime corridor, is additive to the other routes and will assist humanitarian organizations providing life-saving assistance. Aid is arriving in Cyprus. It will be screened for loading onto ships for delivery to Gaza, where humanitarian organizations, including trusted USAID and U.S. government partners, will determine how to ensure they reach those in need accordance to humanitarian principles. Although this is a new mechanism of assistance assistance for Gaza, more, of course, must be done. Humanitarian conditions on the ground continue to deteriorate, and vital border crossings have closed at a time when moving more aid is critical. We are working tirelessly to surge assistance through all available means to address the impacts of this crisis. That's why the U.S. established a humanitarian maritime corridor to augment, not replace, ongoing efforts to scale the delivery of humanitarian aid by land. So let me be clear. We continue to press for all border crossings to be open for overland deliveries of aid, but more must be done to address the scale of need. We have and will continue to press Israel and other partners in the region to allow for, to ensure the safety of humanitarian actors and activities, open additional land crossings, and remove impediments to the delivery of humanitarian aid, and do more to make sure that aid can get to the places that it needs to go. So with that, Sean, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Let me start with the peer.
Sure.
The UN, your counterpart of the UN was saying today that they're still looking operationally in terms of how to deliver the aid, that there are concerns about safety, about the logistics, I'm paraphrasing, of particularly the UN workers there in Gaza, even if aid comes off the pier. Do you think these can be sorted out? I mean, I know that the pier is anchored today, but are you confident that delivery can actually happen and that those issues will be sorted out?
Absolutely. So we intend to work with the totality of the UN family to make sure that aid can get where it needs to go. Specifically, Sean, after the commodities are ashore, the UN, through the logistics cluster, will receive the aid for humanitarian organizations, including ones that I just said, that are trusted partners of the U.S. government to distribute aid inside Gaza.
Vedant Patel is the State Department deputy spokesperson at his news conference in Washington. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, it's Kayla from C-SPAN. Imagine 45 years ago when there was just a handful of television networks. C-SPAN first went on the air bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Greta from C-SPAN. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of our 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free. From AP, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation Chairman Martin Gruenberg sat for a second day of grilling Thursday on Capitol Hill, this time at the Senate Banking Committee, after a damning report about the agency's toxic workplace culture was released last week. The hearing was called to address oversight of financial regulators, including the Office of the Comptroller and the Federal Reserve. But 2 days of testimony have largely focused on the workplace culture at the FDIC and failures, according to the report, by Gruenberg in preventing hundreds of instances of harassment and discrimination against employees. That was from AP. Senator Steve Daines, Republican from Montana, asked these questions of Chair Gruenberg.
On day one of his administration, President Biden said, and I quote, "If you're ever working with me and I hear you treat another colleague with disrespect, talk down to someone, I promise you I will fire you on the spot. No if or buts," end quote. It's interesting, given the findings of a recent investigation into the workplace culture at the FDIC, that Chair Gruenberg, I find that you're still sitting here, still with a job before this committee. How do you reconcile what President Biden said with what's been going on with the FDIC and the fact you still hold your job?
As I've indicated, I accept all the findings of the recent report, including in regard to my conduct. I've committed to addressing the issue personally, as well as to having our workforce on a confidential basis regularly give me feedback, as well as engaging a executive coach and any necessary counseling. I'm prepared to take responsibility on my part for the findings of the report.
So how do you resolve your boss here saying, I promise I'll fire you on the spot? We start first of all with who's been fired so far at the FDIC?
I can tell you, Senator, that this year there have been 4 employees separated from the agency for misconduct. We have had changes of senior management responsible in this area.
Just make sure I know what separated means. Define that.
It means they've either received termination notices from the agency, or before the disciplinary action takes effect, they've resigned or retired, which they're allowed to do under the law.
How many of them have been terminated?
I would want to get back to you, but several of them, but not all of them. I mean, all of them were either received termination notices or other disciplinary action before that action took place. At least not all, some of them voluntarily left the agency.
What I find revealing is that some of the same Senate Democrats who have sought to stake their political identities on fighting against sexual harassment and discrimination are sitting here today and frankly turning a blind eye to the very same abuses that are happening under your leadership at the FDIC. And I think it's another example on full display for the American people of the Biden administration and Senate Democrats talking out of both sides of their mouth.
Senator Steve Daines, Republican from Montana, questioning the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation Chair Martin Gruenberg at a Senate Banking Committee hearing. An article from Semaphore reads that Senator Elizabeth Warren, known for calling Wall Street executives to task for management failures, has been running a behind-the-scenes campaign to protect a top banking regulator from documented allegations that he presided over a toxic workplace. Rohit Chopra, a former Warren protege who now runs the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, went to the FDIC's headquarters last week to run Gruenberg through likely questions he would face and practice his answers. People familiar with the matter said. Chopra is a board member at the FDIC. When that session went poorly, Warren's former chief of staff tried again. Dan Geldin, who worked for Warren until 2020 and now runs a Washington consulting firm, went through a mock hearing with Gruenberg over the weekend. And that was from Semaphore. Senator Warren is a member of the Banking Committee and questioned Chair Gruenberg today.
Everyone deserves a workplace that is free of discrimination and harassment. Chairman Gruenberg, the Republicans who have called today for your resignation are engaged in a purely political exercise. They want to replace you with Vice Chairman Travis Hill, who was the right-hand man to your Republican predecessor, who allowed the culture problems at the agency to fester. Your resignation would do nothing to improve the toxic culture at the FDIC, but it would give Republicans a veto over bank policy. Culture starts at the top, and it is your responsibility to fix this. So let me ask, do you commit to implementing all of the recommendations from the action plan and the independent review?
Yes, Senator.
We will be watching you to make sure that you keep your word on this.
Senator Elizabeth Warren questioning the FDIC Chair Martin Gruenberg at today's Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee hearing. Story from The Hill on the hearing has this. Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, said he plans to introduce a bill that will extend the statute of limitations for FDIC employees to file suit over the abuses they experienced while employed at the agency. The future of the Affordable Connectivity Program, also called ACP, which subsidized internet service for low-income households, was discussed today at a House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing with FCC commissioners. April was the last month of full benefits, $30 per month for internet, $75 per month on tribal lands. plus a one-time discount of up to $100 to purchase a computer. The program ran for 2 years and spent $14 billion, but was not renewed by Congress. At today's hearing, Congressman Steve Womack, Republican from Arkansas, questioned Commissioner Brendan Carr, also a Republican.
One of my favorite historical persons is Ronald Reagan, who said that there's no better example of eternal life than a government program. Was he talking about ACP?
Thank you for the question. It's certainly possible that that idea could apply here. I think the conversation here is one where there actually could be some common ground. But I think for us to talk about this 23 million figure and say that therefore this program is a success doesn't really do justice to our obligations for fiscal responsibility. Again, we have lots of people on this program that are using the ACP benefit for a third internet connection. And again, the data shows that 85% of households on ACP today, again, a program that we said at the FCC is designed to get people online that couldn't afford it, would still be connected to the internet without the program.
Well, I get calls from people who have become dependent on it, and I try to explain to them the challenges that we're having, because these are the same people that would tell us that a $34 trillion debt is not a sustainable idea, and I try to remind them that this is how you get $34 trillion in debt, is that you pay for a lot of things that may not be, it may be important to everyday Americans, and certainly they want to use the internet, but maybe not necessarily so important as to commit this country to future fiscal conditions that we happen to be in today.
Congressman Steve Womack, Republican from Arkansas, questioning FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, Republican, at today's Appropriations Subcommittee hearing. Also talking about this program, Congressman Mark Pocan, Democrat from Wisconsin, in questions to the FCC Chair, Jessica Rosenworcel, a Democrat.
So let me also talk about the Affordable Connectivity Program, because we get it a lot from constituents, town halls. I just did a bunch of them, and it comes up, I think, virtually every town hall, people talking about it. And it really does matter with the cost. I live in a rural town of, I think we're 870 right now. We're getting up there. We first got about 5 years ago broadband. Prior to that, I paid for a Verizon Home Fusion product, a satellite. I got a deal, the half-price deal, of $300 a month for 80 measured gigs of broadband. I would call my husband the last week of a month, telling him to quit watching Netflix, because every hour of Netflix was about two and a half. Anyway, long story short, we benefit from this in Wisconsin. 400,000 households, about 1 out of every 6 have benefited from this program. And it does come up a lot. And $30 is a lot of money. I mean, you think about it, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is barely over that for a week's worth of groceries to help keep kids out of poverty. So $30 does matter. And in a rural area, I pay twice as much for the broadband in Wisconsin in a rural area than I do here in D.C. at the place I live in. So having said all that, this is like a really, really valuable program. A majority of my colleagues have signed on to legislation to renew it, and yet we can't get a vote. Part of that's our problem. We've got lots of them these days. But what are you looking at if this doesn't happen? What can you do to try to help look at replacing something that would help my constituents?
All right. Well, I appreciate that your support for this program. And in fact, it's 1 in 6 households, not just in your district and in Wisconsin, nationwide, that rely on this. It's an important program for Blue America and Red America. Everyone relies on it. And if it goes away, we do have real limits. We have a universal service fund with a program that supports households at about $9 a month, but it is a much more limited subset of households that can be supported with this program because there are different qualifications under the law, and it is a much more limited set of carriers that are allowed to provide this service. It feels to me we've come so far, and all of us saw kids sitting outside of fast food restaurants and in library parking lots to go to class during the worst days of COVID. We don't have to go back to that. This is a program that helps prevent that. It feels to me like we would make a mistake if we stop now. We've just come too far.
Chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Jessica Rosenworcel, Democrat, questioned by Congressman Mark Pocan, Democrat from Wisconsin, at an appropriations subcommittee hearing on the president's proposed FCC budget for fiscal year 2025. That proposal is $448 million, 15% increase from last year. Story from CBS News. The Supreme Court on Thursday upheld the funding structure for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, rescuing the Consumer Finance Agency from another effort by its critics to weaken it. The court said in a 7-2 decision that the agency's funding structure complies with the Constitution's Appropriations Clause. Justice Clarence Thomas authored the majority opinion. Justices Samuel Alito and Neil Gorsuch dissented. That from CBS News. On Wall Street today, the Dow closed lower after briefly crossing 40,000 for the first time ever. Dow down 38, NASDAQ down 44, S&P down 11. The Senate today voted to repeal a Securities and Exchange Commission rule that requires companies holding their customers' cryptocurrency assets include them on their balance sheets. The vote was 60-38. 11 Democrats voted yes, along with Republicans. The House passed this bill last week, 228 to 182. It now goes to President Biden, who says he plans to veto it. A veto override would need a 2/3 vote of the House and Senate. The original votes to pass are short of that mark. I surrender all. Michael W. Smith performing in Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol at the unveiling of a statue of evangelist Reverend Billy Graham, who passed away in 2018. The statue is 7 feet tall, made of bronze, with an open Bible in the Reverend's hand. The statue comes from North Carolina. Each state gets to donate 2 statues to be part of National Statuary Hall collection. And every so often, a state will switch out a statue for a new one. Associated Press article explains the Graham statue replaces one of early 20th century Governor Charles Aycock, who, while known as an education advocate, has fallen from favor because of his ties to the white supremacy movement at the time. Speaking at today's ceremony, Governor Roy Cooper, Democrat from North Carolina.
The Reverend Graham was known as a minister to millions, the pastor to presidents, a selfless man of God who lived out his calling by preaching and teaching across the world, always returning to his beloved home in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina for respite, then to return again to his worldwide ministry. I'll never forget as a child hearing him preach in Carter Finley Stadium in Raleigh. He brought together people of different faiths and different races. Today we acknowledge that he is a better representation of our state than the statue it replaces, which brought memories of a painful history of racism. Not that Reverend Graham was perfect. He would have been the first to tell us that. Instead, he realized that he and all of us here today have feet of clay. We are imperfect. We have been found wanting. But he believed, as many of us do, that there is redemption. And he gave his life to delivering that message. The Reverend Billy Graham also recognized that the responsibility of public servants such as us, and especially that of the President of the United States, was so immense that whoever was in that office deserved a presumption of good faith, the power of prayer, the gift of his wisdom, friendship, and advice. He did not seek to bludgeon or deify any political candidate or party. Instead, he would use his magnetic, loving, and persuasive gifts to counsel and lift in prayer political leaders of both parties. He did not seek to attack other religions, and he treated all with dignity and respect.
Governor Roy Cooper, Democrat from North Carolina, at today's unveiling ceremony for the statue of the late Reverend Billy Graham. Also there and making remarks, the House Speaker Mike Johnson, House members and senators from North Carolina, and Reverend Franklin Graham, Billy Graham's son. Speaker Johnson pointing out that Billy Graham is the 4th person to be honored with the 3 highest honors from Congress: Congressional Gold Medal, laying in honor in the Capitol after you pass away, and a statue in Statuary Hall. The other three are former Presidents Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford and civil rights activist Rosa Parks. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.